Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Establish the Show. It is a Thanksgiving edition. Terrible holiday, great day for football. I, of course, am Adam Levitan. As always, I'm joined for Establish the Show by Evan Silva and by Andrew Wiggins back from his hiatus. Evan, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, man? Love playing DFS on Thanksgiving. Adds a little spice to the day, and I always look forward to this slate. I think it's a pretty interesting slate. Excited to break it down with you guys.
Wiggins, people demand to know where you were last week. They missed you. How's it going?
It's good. Hey, I was in Chicago just knocking out the family activities a week early, and it's a good thing I did because we got 2 feet of snow here yesterday. So trying to travel during that would have been brutal. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the slate. I'm a little sad that we don't have Stafford Galladay connection. It started this way back with Stafford and Megatron. I would play that every single Thanksgiving, and I think it's dead this year. I don't know if Driscoll, Galladay, or what David Blau to Galladay has the same ring to it. So we'll have to sort through that.
Couple notes right now. First of all, the subscriber league for Establish the Run is up. If you're a member, you go to Evan Silva's Thanksgiving matchups and you go to the top, you'll find a link to get into the DraftKings league. It's $3 to get in, rake free, added prizes. I don't have an Establish the Run t-shirt. However, top 5 people who finish in this league will be getting an Establish the Run t-shirt. But most importantly, it's rake free and it's just fun to compete against fellow ETR people. Also, we are running a few promo codes right now if you're not yet a member. Absurd promo code, which I actually was against, to be quite frank. It's too cheap. However, $5 if you use the promo code Black Friday on a 1-week pass. You get it for 1 week, $5, normally $20. Also, ETR20 gets you 20% off any monthly purchase, and midseason, promo code midseason will get you $80 off a rest of season package. We will be here with all the content through the Super Bowl. All right, the goal of this show, and we normally go position by position, and we'll be back on Friday to go position by position through the main slate. The goal of this show, however, is to go game by game and try to get a little bit deeper, because plays that were on a main slate, on an 11-game slate, that we would just brush off as too thin, floors are too low, et cetera, are definitely in play. And I thought Evan did a good job in his matchups article for Thanksgiving in going deeper with some of these guys who are in play. And we're going to talk about some of them, such as Javon Williams, such as these tight ends that people have never heard of, because there's only really one tight end I think anybody has heard of on this slate that actually is in play. But I think there are some other interesting names. So we're going to go a little bit deeper than normal. But I want to get general takes on this slate. And first of all, Wiggins, I would say that, you're the king of being upset with the sites about pricing. I would even admit that on this slate, the pricing is not great because it is extremely easy and probably too easy to fit in the 3 obvious best plays: Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott. It is, you can fit those guys very easily. And I would suggest that an overwhelming number of lineups are going to fit all 3 guys. And that's probably right. So what do you think about the slate as a whole, Wiggins, from a DFS perspective? And what do we do when the pricing is makes it kind of so it's almost a pick 'em beyond those top 3 guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little disappointing for cash, but it's a 3-game slate, so it's not totally surprising. But they could have been a little bit tighter, especially on DraftKings. I think you can get those 3 guys in pretty easily, especially if Julio doesn't go. That's just going to open things up more. And we're expecting Taylor Gabriel probably not to go, so there's some value in the Bears game. But I mean, it should be fun for GPPs. You're going to have to make some plays that make you a little uncomfortable. But I think we can find some spots where there's some good leverage to be had.
Yeah, and one thing I would say on these mini slates as opposed to full slates, if you're playing tournaments, I would be more comfortable leaving more money on the table. Just generally speaking about small slates, 2 or 3 game slates. If you're playing tournaments, you're fine leaving more money than usual on the table, et cetera, et cetera. We do have a lot of injury news, which we'll get to, Evan, and I think there's maybe more injuries for Thanksgiving than usual. If you go to Establish Run Twitter, we tweeted out a bunch of them this morning. I think the biggest one is Julio, though, Evan. Before we get into it, do you have any read on whether you think Julio is going to end up playing or not with that shoulder issue?
Yeah, I think that he probably will. I mean, I'm kind of leaning on Dr. Chow here. Dr. Chow thinks that he probably will. It is, really starting to shake up as a lost season for the Falcons. So I think that adds some pause there. But it was an AC joint sprain. That's typically a day-to-day injury. It's going to be a really big deal if he does not play. But my my expectation as of tonight is that he will, but he didn't practice on Monday or Tuesday. Am I correct about it? I didn't
Correct.
look at their injury report today. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
So that, every practice that he misses adds more doubt. And, but I don't know. We'll see. I guess we'll learn more tomorrow, and then we'll know for sure, hopefully by Thursday morning.
Yeah, and one thing about these slates where games aren't overlapping, on these small slates when the games are, a different set, noon, 4, 8, you need to be using late swap to your advantage. I think there's a huge edge in all formats, and not just with injury stuff, just seeing what your opponents have. Let's say you get off to a bad start and you have a bunch of Bears and the Bears score 0 points, pivoting to something contrarian in the later games, et cetera, et cetera. So I would encourage people, if you're playing to get max EV out of this slate, you will have late swap options on the table. All right, let's go ahead and get into this game by game here. Chicago at Detroit. And the big story for me in this game is what you think the Bears running backs are going to be able to do and how they'll be used against the Lions, because really they're down to 2. I mean, Mike Davis is gone. Ryan Nall only played 3 snaps last week. They're only using David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen now. The Bears have been extremely game plan specific with how they use Tariq Cohen. The last 2 weeks have been big spike up weeks for Tariq Cohen in terms of usage. If he's going to see 6, 7, 8 targets in a game, he's extremely viable on DraftKings, and I think one of the better running back plays on DraftKings. How do you think the game plan for the Bears sets up here, Evan, when it comes to Montgomery and Cohen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that historically, absolutely, Tariq Cohen's usage has been game plan specific. I think that over the last 2 weeks, though, I think it's been a little bit less game plan specific and more just like they need a spark on offense because their traditional running game, their basic running game is just broken. I mean, they can't open any holes up front, and David Montgomery has been unable to get any space between the tackles. So I think they've just kind of needed a spark. At times, Tariq Cohen has given that to them. He's got 14 touches and 13 touches over his last 2. He's played over 50% of the snaps in 3 straight. The Lions have allowed the 3rd most receiving yards per game to running backs. And I think that this game shapes up pretty well for Tariq Cohen because I think it checks the boxes of it being a game plan specific game where it's favorable on paper for Tariq Cohen, and also just because the Bears have needed this, and he's been giving them a little bit of a spark offensively. Now, this is not necessarily cut into David Montgomery's playing time because last week he played 64% of the snaps, was a pretty good number for him. He ran 23 pass routes, his most all year. So if you're looking for contrarian ways to attack the slate, like David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen playing them together, I think is a little bit interesting. Neither of them is particularly expensive. David Montgomery is tied for the league lead in carries inside the 5-yard line. He and the Lions have given up 17 all-purpose touchdowns in 11 games to running backs. And Tariq Cohen, I think, is going to continue to play a big role on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of injuries in terms of up front for the Lions who've been struggling against the running back position all year. I think David Montgomery is going to project well because his role is strong. As Evan alluded to, his role has been better than his efficiency. I mean, this dude has really been bad from the efficiency perspective. I'm higher, I think, as we sit right now, if I had to pick one, specifically for DraftKings, especially on Tariq Cohen than David Montgomery. I think projections will likely tell a different story, though, just because if you give David Montgomery baselines on his usage, he's going to look better than he actually does. I don't know if we can find breakout spots for David Montgomery. It just seems like he's pretty rough from the efficiency perspective, but what do you think?
Yeah, well, first off, I like Evan's calling the cheat code there with the 2 running backs. A couple of years ago, I remember Corey Albertson won the Millie Maker, I believe, with the 2 Atlanta running backs, and that was viable a few times. I don't know if it's viable here because Chicago's just not capable of scoring a lot of points, but it's something not a lot of people are going to do. So that's definitely an interesting angle for tournaments. As far as how I prefer them, I think it's pretty site specific. And on DraftKings, which is obviously PPR, Cohen is cheaper. So I think he's probably the preferred play. I mean, they're projecting very close. I would say Cohen's got the higher floor there just because he's pretty likely to catch a few balls. And then if you look over on FanDuel, I think he's 5'9" and Cohen's like 6'4". So half point PPR, like I think it's pretty clear he'll be the higher owned guy there. And I probably slightly prefer him there. He's a little bit more likely to score a touchdown. But they're both very close. So I don't think you could fault going either direction on either side.
All right, I wanted to mention the injuries in this game because I think it's important. I do not expect Taylor Gabriel to play. And let's start there, Evan, with the Bears wideouts. I think their 3-wide set is going to be Allen Robinson, who we know and love, Anthony Miller, who I think was a prospect that Draft Twitter was on a pretty decent amount and has had his ups and downs. Still wasn't playing a full-time role as of last week. And then I think the guy coming in to sub for Taylor Gabriel will be Javon Williams. And if anybody has played preseason over the last 2 years, you are well aware of Javon Williams, who has been one of the best players in preseason. In fact, he was so good in preseason. Late this past preseason, we couldn't even play him because he wasn't playing that much because he had already made the team. Talk to me. Well, why don't you tell the people a little about Javon Williams for those who aren't familiar with him? And what do you think about Anthony Miller? Are we going to see a role change here for Anthony Miller? Because based on the injuries, I am projecting Anthony Miller to be one of the higher owned secondary plays on the slate.
Yeah, Javon Williams, as you mentioned, was an absolute monster in the preseason in 2018, and then this year they scaled him back because he made the team. So Taylor Gabriel missed weeks 4 and 5 against the Vikings and the Raiders. Javon Williams jumped right into Taylor Gabriel with a concussion. This is actually his second concussion of the season. Like, he's not going to play. Mm-hmm. But in those 2 games, Javon Williams was an every down player, 94% and 93% of the snaps. He had a good game, 4 for 56 against the Vikings, and then he totally dudded against the Raiders with a 0. So now he costs $3,000 on DK. He's like stone minimum. In terms of his skill set, he's 6'3", 215. He's a big possession receiver. We saw him play a lot in the slot in the preseason. He's going to be an outside receiver here because Anthony Miller is the Bears slot receiver, and Allen Robinson plays a lot in the slot as well. But yeah, 6'3", 215, big possession receiver with adequate speed, 4.53, and like where he's really made his mark in the preseason has been as a guy who makes contested catches. And I think that this is a good on-paper matchup for him because Rashawn Melvin looks like he is not going to play. And so the Lions are going to have to dig into their depth for a rookie 5th-round pick out of Penn State, Amani Oruwariye, who he's a freak athlete. Like, I don't know what they got in the water. And it's Happy Valley, right?
It is. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
HGH Valley. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. And this guy's just a freak athlete. I mean, 4.47. He's big and 6'8", 2 cone, which is like ridiculous, for a guy who's like 6'2", 205 at corner. But he's really, really raw. He only started for 1 season at Penn State. And that's probably going to be the guy that Javon Williams matches up with most in this game because I think that we're going to see a lot of Darius Slay on Allen Robinson. And now Matt Nagy can get Allen Robinson away from Darius Slay. We could talk about that more in a little bit. But, Javon Williams really stands out as the number 1 beneficiary of Taylor Gabriel not playing. I did want to mention that there's a possibility that we could see Riley Ridley, who's been inactive for every single game this year. And he would be the threat to Javon Williams' playing time. But again, he has not even played a snap this season.
Yeah. And the thing about it on DraftKings is like Anthony Miller is only 900 more than Javon Williams. I think it's going to push a lot of people, Wiggins, onto Anthony Miller. And I think he's going to be really owned once people start going through the depth chart here and realize where the Bears are at. And I think Anthony Miller makes for an interesting play, but also an interesting fade because A, he's attached to Mitch Trubisky. And B, he's freaking Anthony Miller, and we have other options down there at the bottom. What are you thinking at the bottom of this Chicago wide receiver tree?
Yeah, Anthony Miller is a lot safer. He's a guy that's been coming on a little bit the last 2 weeks, but if you go back 2 weeks ago, he played a bunch of snaps and then it dropped off last week. Obviously, that's not a concern with Gabriel missing. But, I think we know what we're getting with him compared to with Williams. And he's also on the buy low model. So that's good. As far as tournaments, I mean, let's keep in mind that outside of Allen Robinson, and even there have been a lot of games where Allen Robinson has disappeared just because of how inept this offense is. And you're
Right.
talking about a team that's going on the road. It's probably going to be a slow game. The last time they played was very slow. They have 20.5 total. There's a lot of pass to basically everyone on this offense failing. So if you start thinking about having the running back, 1, 2 of their receivers, potentially their defense, like that's a good way to lose all your money. So I don't know. I mean, Anthony Miller is going to be tough to avoid in cash on both sites, I think. But I don't want to say an easy GPP fade, but I'll be strongly considering it with the ownership that he's going to carry.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the spot for Allen Robinson while we're here, Evan. We've always been high here on Allen Robinson's natural talent. He's, I think you mentioned in matchups that his floor is actually better than perception. Despite Mitch Trubisky, it still makes me uneasy to pay these 6-7K price tags for Allen Robinson when things can go so south with Trubisky. Do you find anything in this matchup for Allen Robinson that stands out?
Well, I think that, first of all, these teams played in week 10, and Allen Robinson got 9 targets. Only 2 of them were against Darius Slay. So and Darius Slay has been playing really good ball recently. He shut down Amari Cooper a couple weeks ago. But they were able to get Allen Robinson away from him. Allen Robinson came away with 6 for 86. That's a pretty good stat line there. And I think that, Allen Robinson just makes the most sense if you want to roll the dice on Trubisky being the number 1 quarterback scorer on the slate. We've got, the Atlanta New Orleans game it could kind of go any which way, I think. And then the Buffalo Dallas game really on paper kind of sets up as a low scoring game. So, could Mitch find his way to being scoring like 23 points and being the number 1 overall fantasy quarterback on the Thanksgiving slate? I think it's kind of in the range of potential outcomes because Mitchell Trubisky had his best game this past week. He started to run a little bit more. And he had his second best game of the season against the Lions in week 10. So, and the Lions, it looks like they're going to be without their number 2 cornerback. It looks like they might be without their top pass rusher, Trey Flowers. They're just not a good defense. I think that there are kind of some reasons to believe that they might be tanking. The Bears defense could set up Mitchell Trubisky with short fields for sure. And, his main man, in those situations is going to be Allen Robinson. So I think that, as a stack that never is going to make people comfortable, and so that I think will create a little bit lower ownership because I think that Drew Brees and maybe Josh Allen and maybe Dak Prescott might carry more ownership. I think that Mitchell Trubisky to Allen Robinson is a pretty interesting stack that might be, relatively low owned on this particular 3-game slate.
Oh, I agree. It'll definitely be lower owned than a lot of the other stuff we're going to talk about. I want to mention the Bears tight ends because the tight end position at this slate is so absurd. Like if you're not playing Jared Cook, I wasn't really joking. I don't think most people have heard of the other options at tight end on this slate. And we can start with the Bears because Trey Burton's on IR. Adam Shaheen, I do not expect to play. The Gronkinator, Ben Brockiner, is not expected to play. So I think the Bears are going to have 3 tight ends active. They'll be Holtz, Horsted, and Sowell. Do you have any read, Evan? Can we play any of these guys? Who would you pick if you could play one of these Bears tight ends? And are they all just locks for zeros?
Not Sowell. Let's not play Sowell because he's an offensive lineman.
He's
Watch
like
him
George,
catch a touchdown now.
He's like George Fant. Yeah, he's like George Fant. Yeah.
Or Dennis Kelly last week scored a touchdown.
Yeah.
No, I think that it's between Jesper Horsted and JP Holtz. JP Holtz is a blocker, and Jesper Horsted killed it in the Ivy League at Princeton. But they signed him off the practice squad last week. They have all these Ivy League tight ends. Like Broniker went to Harvard, and then they signed Jesper Horsted off the practice squad last week. He played 4 snaps in his NFL debut. Now, all of a sudden, he looks poised to play a ton of snaps against the Lions. He was super, super productive at Princeton. His athletic metrics aren't that great. But, I mean, he's been on the practice squad. He's been there. I mean, he's a complete like dart throw. He's got to be minimum price. I'm certain
Yeah,
that he is. Yeah, I'm sure
he
that he
is.
is. Yeah.
He is indeed 2,500, and it would be more interesting to me if we needed a salary. Wiggins, I guess one of the decisions that we'll talk about, and we should save to talk about when we get to Jared Cook, but the rest of the tight end position is so barren. I mean, I don't know how you feel about going off with some of these punt guys. It seems really thin.
I'm not touching any of the Bears tight ends. I mean, even their better tight ends, I don't know if any of them is top 10 fantasy points all year. You just don't need it. Well, I mean, look, all the plays stink, but if you're going to play a minimum guy, I mean, Hawkinson is like right around minimum, at least he has shown some upside. Like he's not for sure going to play, but let's just assume he does. I think he's an interesting tournament play who's going to fly under the radar. So I'm not looking at the Bears guys.
Yeah, and then Jaden Graham is essentially a minimum too in the final game, and like he made a big play at least last week.
Yeah, so at least someone that has like you could talk yourself into maybe having somewhat of a ceiling. I don't think that's the case with the Bears guys.
I was actually at the Penn Princeton game on Saturday. It was like it had the feel of a real high school game. Let me tell you, it was a sight to behold. Okay, let's go to the Lions side. I want to mention the injury to Jeff Driscoll, and I don't think Jeff Driscoll is like hurt bad. He's got a sore hamstring. I expect him to end up playing, but I think a big part of Jeff Driscoll's success and the way he's been winning is with his mobility. If Jeff Driscoll is limited in any sense, it's really bad. So I think all the Lions guys down the line are going to be the lowest owned team by far on the entire slate. And I think Bears defense is going to be the highest owned defense on the entire slate, especially on DraftKings, where somehow DraftKings made the Bears defense 2,500, which is just, I don't know how they ended up there. But Evan, how much concern you have on Jeff Driscoll, and what do you think about the matchups for guys like Galladay and Marvin?
Yeah, I think that they made my guess is that they made the Bears that cheap because the Bears have sucked as a fantasy defense this year. They're like 16th.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm assuming that they use like an algorithm to arrive there, and that's what got them there. But yeah, I mean, like pound for pound, on a price adjusted basis, like it's the Bears are just screaming at us at that price point. Yeah, so Jeff Driscoll came out of last week's game. He ran 9 times. Came out of last week's game. Matt Patricia was like, he ran a bunch in the game. He, suffered a tight hamstring. He was sore again today. He had his worst game of the season. Took 6 sacks, threw 3 interceptions, fumbled, and that was against the Redskins. Now he's facing what's still a good Bears defense. I mean, they're not giving up points. They just haven't been scoring fantasy points because they're not getting, a million sacks and, returning fumbles and interceptions for touchdowns like they did last year. That's just, natural regression. But I think that if we get Jeff Driscoll confined to the pocket due to the hamstring injury, and also the Bears defense has allowed the 8th fewest rushing yards to quarterbacks this year. If we can, and if that's a product of Chuck Pagano's scheme and Jeff Driscoll is at well less than 100%, that's going to be a big problem for Jeff Driscoll playing from the pocket, because such a big part of his game and really his fantasy scoring ability is driven by his legs. And it may be even, a situation where we do see the next dude, David Blue, who was like the 4th stringer for the Browns in training camp, like just a pure camp arm. He would be the next guy up.
Yeah, so I mean, given all that, I really think Galladay and Marvin Jones are going to be extremely low owned. I would kind of agree with Wiggins that if I was punting it off at tight end, I'm more interested in TJ Hawkinson, who despite a shoulder issue, still ran a ton of routes last week, still played a ton of snaps. I don't know, Wiggins, is there any leverage to be had on Detroit's side?
I mean, they're not going to be owned. So yeah, especially Galladay, because it seems like Driscoll has favored Marvin Jones. But I mean, we've seen with these guys like for a long time that it can swing back and forth very quickly. So, I mean, I love Galladay in tournaments. It's like we said at the top of the show, these plays are not going to make you comfortable, but we know that Galladay has a high ceiling, and he'll be probably one of the lowest owned players on the slate. So hard to go wrong with that in tournaments.
One pivot off of David Montgomery, who I think will be far more owned, is Bo Scarborough. And I don't think the projection between Bo Scarborough and David Montgomery is really that different. I understand that David Montgomery runs a lot more routes and in theory has a higher ceiling in the pass game. But man, David Montgomery's been so inefficient. And at least Bo Scarborough has been running the ball reasonably well. He has only ran 17 routes total in the last 2 weeks, but they're committed, it seems, to using him as their 2-down pounder in like a LeGarrette Blount kind of role. I think that Bo Scarborough, on DraftKings, he would need to get to 100 yards or score a touchdown for it to matter, but he has at least a chance to do so. I mean, you noted, Evan, that the Bears' run defense, since losing Akeem Hicks, has been an absolute disaster. I think Bo Scarborough has passed outscoring somebody like David Montgomery pretty reasonably. What do you think about Bo?
Yeah, you mentioned it's just he has 0 catches through the 2 games where he's been the Bears starter. They've been giving him a lot of work, and I think he's kind of answered the bell. He's been really breaking tackles at a very, very high rate. He's at like almost 5 yards per carry over the past 2 weeks. He's been producing for them. You mentioned Akeem Hicks' injury. In the meantime, since Akeem Hicks' injury, the Bears also lost Danny Trevathan, their best inside linebacker. And J.D. McKissick and Ty Johnson just really have been they're like the same guy almost, in terms of their usage. So you definitely are going to need a touchdown from Bo Scarborough. The Bears have given up 9 rushing touchdowns over their last 7 games, so they've been giving in that respect. I do just worry about, the Lions offense just not putting up many points here, especially with a banged up quarterback. And, just their offense is just not good.
Yeah. And you could say the same thing about the Bears, and that's the concern for me with playing a lot of Bears in one lineup is like we could see a really low scoring game here. If we end up with the Mitch that we've seen for most of the season. I do agree with Evan that I think there's paths to Mitch. Also, just a really wide range of outcomes on Mitch. And I think that makes for a good tournament play, specifically on a small slate. Anybody I didn't mention in this game you want to highlight, Evan? I didn't bring up Dusty Danny Amendola. I think that's about it for who I didn't bring up.
No, I think we kind of hit on everybody. Hawkinson, is a guy that just really hasn't done anything since week 1.
Mm-hmm.
But, as you guys both brought him up, I think that he's interesting here because, and I think he's going to play. He's been battling this shoulder thing for a while. He was limited practice on, I believe, Monday and Tuesday. His snaps were way down last week at 44%, his lowest of the season. But he ran 31 pass routes, which were tied for the 3rd most that he's had all season. The Bears have given up the 5th most catches, 6th most yards to opposing tight ends. And, Hawkinson, I kind of like that they scaled back his run blocking snaps and are just using him as a route running tight end, and letting Jesse James and Logan Thomas handle the the dirty work. So that's a guy that I wanted to highlight a little bit.
All right. Anything else from this game, Wiggins?
I'd just say, there's a lot of value on the Bears side, so they're going to catch a lot of ownership, and there's just a lot of paths to them failing. So be careful in GPPs, but also know that if you play guys from this game, it gives you the opportunity to swap. So there's, maybe a slight bump. If there's a tiebreaker on this slate, I'd take the guy that plays earlier because then you can react to whatever happens. And that's a big thing on these sites that are spread out like this.
Yeah. Finding out information earlier, certainly better. And yeah, we talked about it all year. Ownership these days in this current state of DFS is following very in line with projections because so much of the field is using them and mass entering with them, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that a lot of the Bears are projecting well. We know they're going to be relatively high owned. Let's move to a game where I think another story is the pricing. The big story for me in Buffalo, Dallas is the way that Dak and Amari were priced by DraftKings. Dak is 5,700. Amari is only 6K. We understand that Amari has been absolutely atrocious the last 2 weeks. Maybe we can blame 2 weeks ago on injury. Maybe we can blame last week on an impossible matchup against Stephon Gilmore. I'm curious though, Evan, this is another difficult matchup against Tre'Davious White. However, God, I don't want to go overboard on home road splits, but Amari has absolutely shredded. Shredded every time he's been home as a Cowboy, and he's been rough on the road for whatever that's worth. I don't know if we could say why, but Amari can certainly win against Tre'Davious White. I wouldn't call it a good matchup though. Amari is very cheap on DraftKings. What do you think about him?
I think it's just exactly what you said. And Dak really correlates strongly too with those home road splits. Even you just go back to the games that they played last year. There have been massive home road splits in favor of Dak and Amari at Jerry World. So, I mean, that's something that you can kind of hang your hat on because I think that these guys are going to be lower owned than they usually would on a slate like this because, of the recency bias against New England. They didn't get it done, and now they're facing the freaking Bills who don't give up points. So I think it's an interesting stack in that respect. I do like Michael Gallup, though. Kind of as a result of that difficult matchup for Amari Cooper. The number 2 cornerback for the Bills, Levi Wallace, who ran like a 4.7 coming out of Alabama. That's why he wasn't drafted. And he's a starter in the NFL after not being drafted out of Alabama. So, he's kind of like been an overachiever, but he's given up a 70% completion rate, 4 touchdowns this season, and they've started to scale back his snaps a little bit because he's been fairly ineffective. And Michael Gallup has been an absolute baller. And I think that he might go just a little bit more overlooked than he should. And so I think that he's pretty interesting as a result of that difficult matchup.
Yeah, and the pricing on DraftKings is going to make Dak. Dak's definitely very highly owned, Wiggins, and Amari. I think also, despite the recent struggles and the matchup, if they would have made Amari 67 and Dak 65, it would have been a whole different story. I don't want to be as price sensitive on this slate, so if I think that Dak and Amari are in a bad matchup like Evan does, and I kind of agree, I'd be willing to IKB. I know better than projections. What do you think about the price and the situation with Dak and Amari specifically on DraftKings?
Yeah, and I'd also throw out, we're not entirely sure if he's healthy right now. He's been pretty banged up. So I know he played a lot of snaps last week, but he also had 0 catches. It's a tough matchup, but he's probably not 100%. So on FanDuel, he's 7.9. He's 100 more than Julio, 200 more than Allen Robinson. He's probably a better tournament play there because I don't think anyone's going to play him there. And then DraftKings, he's just, I'd say pretty egregiously priced at 6K. You really have to do a pretty big I know best, I think, to not play him. Now, that being said, and I'm talking about cash when I say that, John Brown's only $300 more. The numbers I'm looking at right now have Amari pretty far ahead, but, you could make an argument for why John Brown is a better play. So, I don't know. And I could see John Brown, though, becoming like a sexy tournament play and having similar ownership. So that's a really tough spot that I'm gonna have to give some thought to. And what do you think about that situation, Adam?
Yeah, I think that if Amari was 800 or 900 more, it wouldn't even be a question to be off Amari given the matchup. But at that price, it's harder to be off him. And I do think that Amari at home, he's just so explosive and so dominant. And I love Tre'Davious White and I love the Bills defense. I just hate to just pile him in there just because he's mispriced by 800. You know what I mean? I think on a main slate, that's fine. On a short slate, it's I'm willing to be less price sensitive.
Right, and you're comparing him to the other guys. So John Brown's $300 more, Ridley's 600 more, Allen Robinson's 700 more, Gallup is 500 less. When you get that close, I get that Amari has a tougher matchup, but that Amari is the guy who goes for 40, and Gallup's had some good games. Right. Amari broke the slate on Thanksgiving last year. He went for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, yeah, it'd be a scary fade.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. Amari's ceiling, is outrageous, particularly in Jerry World. But let's talk about why it's a difficult matchup, Evan, because I think that plays into Zeke. And we talked a lot last week about why we liked Phillip Lindsay. It didn't work out. Phillip Lindsay was efficient. Denver's offense was just a disaster. But I think Zeke, and, you don't have to ask the Cowboys to put the ball in Zeke's belly and run the ball up the middle 25 times. And that's what the Bills want you to do. So why don't you give the people a little bit about how the Bills play defense and how it plays into Zeke's hands and why, we could have even more concerns about the pass game.
Yeah, because the Bills kind of get it on defense and they are willing to sacrifice, pretty good rushing efficiency and rushing numbers in exchange for having one of the best pass defenses in the league because they play on almost 100% of their snaps. They play 7-man or fewer boxes. So that allows them to drop defenders into coverage, more defenders than most teams. And, they're not going to sell out to stop the run ever. even if they're facing a good rushing offense like Dallas. So, I mean, and that can, I think that can work in our favor from a fantasy standpoint when we're looking at Ezekiel Elliott. I think he's really underpriced as at 7,400 as like a virtual lock for 20 plus touches and a chance at like 30 touches. He's favored at home. I mean, he checks a lot of boxes this week as a guy that, you just kind of put in almost every lineup.
Okay, let's talk about John Brown because we were comparing him to Amari Cooper. I don't think the matchup for John Brown is particularly good either. Now, I'm a big John Brown fan. I'm a big Josh Allen fan. Going to Jerry World to take on this defense, I think, is one of the tougher tasks, at least from perimeter corner perspective and matchup that the Bills have seen this year. How would you compare the matchup for Amari to the one that John Brown's going to face, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's considerably better. I mean, Tre'Davious White is like a true shutdown corner, like in the Stephon Gilmore tier, I think. And I mean, I like Byron Jones and I like Chidobe Awuzie, but John Brown can run by those guys. John Brown can run by anyone. We saw it last week on the 34-yard touchdown catch, just right over the top of Chris Harris, just ran right by him. And he's averaging 8.1 targets over the course of the season. I know that historically we think of him as a boom bust guy. He has not been a boom bust guy at all this year. He's been incredibly consistent, and he's mixed in his fair share of big games. And man, I like him to outscore Amari, and I like him. I like his chances of being like a top 3 scorer on this specific slate at the wide receiver position. He's a baller. His consistency in terms of his usage and his production have all been there. Josh Allen, is an aggressive passer, and he will take shots to John Brown, no question.
One of the things about Josh Allen is regardless of matchup, nobody else on the slate has the upside to rush for 2 touchdowns and throw for 2 like Josh Allen. And he is extremely aggressive down the field. As Evan mentioned, the fact that Josh Allen is priced 500 more than Dak Prescott on DraftKings is going to keep his ownership low. But God, I mean, Josh Allen's just in play every week for tournaments, and on a short slate like this, he could easily be the top scorer. I think a lot of people are going to see it that way, though. Wiggins, what do you think about Josh Allen and playing around with the Bills passing? We haven't mentioned Cole Beasley at all. Another one of my favorite slot receivers, along with Danny Amendola.
Yeah, I mean, I've already alluded to a little bit. I think there's a decent chance that the ownership on these guys is going to get a little bit ahead of itself because they're just such obvious GPP plays. Josh Allen, he's so easy to stack with John Brown, and he's got the rushing upside, and you can see that he's a little bit mispriced. I don't know. I just kind of see a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is the clear GPP move," and then before you know it, he's become chalk in tournaments. So that concerns me quite a bit, especially on DraftKings. But like you said, for all the reasons that you said, they're good play. For the reasons that they could get away from us, they are good. There's upside there, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'll probably shy away from it just because I'm that worried about ownership and like Trubisky and Matt Ryan, those are guys I think I can say pretty safely will come in quite a bit less on than Josh Allen, at least on DraftKings. So I'm probably gonna look more that direction.
We haven't mentioned Devin Singletary yet, Evan, and we've I've at least personally been battling with Devin Singletary from being probably too excited about a guy who loses a lot of goal line work, who doesn't have a big pass game role, to maybe being too low on a guy who has direct pass to 100 yards and plays 75% of his team snaps. What do you think about this spot for Devin Singletary, and how would you compare him to someone like, say, how would you compare him to, say, somebody like David Montgomery?
I mean, the Bills' rushing offense and their offense in general is just a lot more functional right now than what David Montgomery is experiencing. But with Devin Singletary averaging 18 touches over the last month, the Cowboys give up a lot of receiving production to opposing RBs, and Singletary is running he's got 71 pass routes run compared to Frank Gore's 20 over the past 3 weeks. one of the reasons that we've been down on Devin Singletary, and rightfully so, is because he's been getting vultured so much by Josh Allen. And but that also kind of makes him a positive touchdown regression candidate. I think that we talked about Anthony Miller. He's a positive touchdown regression candidate in the first game that we discussed, because this is a guy who scored 7 touchdowns as a rookie, and this year has 0 touchdowns. And then Devin Singletary scored. Well, he has 0 touchdowns over his last 3 games. Over his previous 4, he had 3 touchdowns in those 4 games. So I think that he's got that kind of coming to him. And those are the things that I like about Devin Singletary. Last week, he played 70% of the snaps to Frank Gore's 30. And, so he kind of checks a lot of boxes as a guy that is getting consistent usage. His matchup isn't overly imposing. He has been running a lot of pass routes and getting a lot of passing game opportunities. He's facing a defense that gives up a lot of running back opportunities in the passing game. So I think he's a pretty interesting play here. And I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you guys think he'll be high owned? 5,800. He's priced well above David Montgomery, or right above David Montgomery, and well above Tariq Cohen.
Before I answer, I got a question for you. If let's just say they get behind like 14-0 right away, is Frank Gore would he just not be a part of the game plan going forward?
I think so, because he's not involved in their passing game essentially.
Yeah. So I mean, here's a guy who's just kind of sneakily been playing 70% of the snaps the last few weeks. Has a path to playing more if they get behind. Could catch a bunch of passes. I mean, I like him quite a bit. I mean, I think he's more talented than David Montgomery. He's been producing more than David Montgomery. And for whatever reason, probably just because of the price, he's going to be less owned than David Montgomery. So I don't know. I'm looking at Levitan's ownership, and he's got him at 20 to 25%. So maybe I'm underselling how much he's going to be owned. But I really think he'll be owned less than Montgomery. And, so there's a reason to like him for sure if you can find that extra money.
Yeah. By the way, I am doing ownership projections specific to this slate. They are up, or they'll be up very shortly. And yeah, I think that, on a 3-game slate, like 20 to 25 isn't like that much. You know what I mean? Like it sounds like a lot, but it's not like over the top. So anybody that's in play and is a reasonable play is going to be somewhere in the 15 to 30 range. And then I think guys like Kamara and Zeke and Michael Thomas will be up towards 60 or 70 with good reason. I don't know if you guys are aware, but Cole Beasley is a rapper. Cole Beasley released like a album or a track. And I think Cole Beasley has a reasonable matchup here as well. And I'm always just like too low on this guy. And like, God, I feel like there's been Thanksgivings before where I'm just like sitting there watching the early game and Cole Beasley has like 7 catches out of the gate and I'm just dead. Do you see that happening in this game, Evan? And what do you think about Cole Beasley?
Yeah, I mean, he's like a legit, really good rapper too. I mean, he drops bars. I like him. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's been like more consistently used than I expected in an offense like this, because their passing game distribution has been so focused on 2 guys, John Brown and Cole Beasley. And that has given both of those guys like very surprisingly high floors week in and week out. Cole Beasley now at 70+ yards and or a touchdown in 5 of the Bills' last 6 games. You look at just the sheer box scores against the Cowboys over their last 2 games. Both of their opponents were led in receiving by slot receivers. Cole Beasley, of course, runs 74% of his routes inside. He's got the revenge game thing going. And, I mean, his usage is – I think it's pretty bankable right now. And, yeah, I mean, I think he's a really good play. I think that his price is pretty good too. I think he's 4,700.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's not that bad.
Okay, let's talk sleepers in this game. And I mean, deep sleepers. Let's start at the Bills tight end position because, God, like I said, anybody behind Jared Cook's going to be considered a sleeper. This dude, Dawson Knox. So I can tell the people who Dawson Knox is and why he's in play here, because we've actually mentioned Dawson Knox a few times on main slates. If there was a chance to pull the trigger, it would certainly be in this one where it's only 3 games and Jared Cook's like the only reasonable guy.
Yeah, Dawson Knox. He played at Ole Miss with DK Metcalf and AJ Brown, who have been absolute stud rookies. They had a third guy in the receiver corps by the name of DeMarcus Lodge. He had a cup of coffee with the Bucks in training camp. Their quarterback was Jordan Teamu, just absolutely dreadful. But Dawson Knox had 0 career touchdown catches at Ole Miss because, these others just stud, second round receivers were hogging all the production. And they used him like as an H-back. He goes to his pro day and he just absolutely rips it up. And, people are like, well, hey, we understand he was in this offense with all these studs, and now it kind of makes sense. He also got hurt a lot in at Ole Miss. But I mean, he just, was not productive whatsoever. Like, I remember turning on, like, I saw his pro day and I watched a bunch of his games, and I was like, he doesn't do anything ever. Like, he just lines up at, as an H-back, or he blocks, or he didn't do anything. And he's like the most boring guy to watch, but he's a really good athlete. He's had some moments this year. He played a season high 78% of the snaps last week. The Cowboys have been giving up a lot of production to opposing tight ends. He's cheap, and I think he's a pretty interesting sleeper here.
Speaking of sleepers, you have one more on your list, and this one didn't even cross my mind. Like, this one, this one's not. I didn't even think about it, so nobody's gonna be on it for sure. I mean, I definitely thought about Dawson Knox. I did not think about Isaiah McKenzie. I thought Isaiah McKenzie had some flashes last year for the Bills. I haven't seen it as much this year, and it's, I'm just typically low on gadget type guys. But this would be a slate if you're looking to get out of line, if you're looking to get thin. This would be the one to do it. I mean, God, Isaiah McKenzie, Evan. Are we serious with this dude?
Not really, but I mean, but hey, again, like, we're gonna have some dudes that are really massively owned, and then so probably what decides the slate is who picks out the best, kind of crazy play,
Yeah.
right? And Isaiah McKenzie is at least a guy to think about. He's run 26 or more pass routes in 3 straight games. He is clearly right now the Bills' number 3 receiver. Robert, what is it? Australian for sex, Foster.
Yep, indeed.
Yeah, he's been injured and just not really a factor. Duke Williams hasn't played since like week 7 or something. So McKenzie is the clear number 3. Every once in a while, they'll give him like a rushing attempt. They'll give him like a jet sweep. He hasn't been productive in a while. Just because the passing game can't support more than 2 guys on a weekly basis. And Isaiah McKenzie is like 4th in line behind John Brown, Cole Beasley, Dawson Knox, Devin Singletary, probably 5th in line. But he's fast. He was an amazing punt returner in college. That's what got him drafted in the 6th round by the Broncos. He had some moments last year, if you remember. I think when he took over as their slot receiver late in the season, he had some big games. He's 3,100. He's really, really cheap. He's got some big play ability, and he's a guy that, like, no one's going to play and no one's going to even think about. And if you want to get a little nuts, man, I mean, he clears up some salary for you, and he's got all those factors working in his favor.
All right. Before we move on here, Wiggins, we haven't mentioned Randall Cobb. We have not mentioned Blake Jarwin. We have not mentioned Jason Witten. Similar to Larry Fitzgerald, I don't typically play guys like Jason Witten. And Randall Cobb was kind of getting to that zone also as a guy who I thought was out of juice. But man, I mean, God, Randall Cobb has actually looked good and healthy and strong the last few weeks. I would rather pick secondary pieces from New Orleans, Atlanta, because I think you have paths to a much better game environment. But what do you think about some of these secondary pieces on Dallas and Buffalo?
Yeah, I think the only time I ever played Jarwin was last Thanksgiving. So
I think I played Dalton Schultz last night. Took a nice
Maybe
0 from him. Yeah,
played Jarwin on the showdown or something. Anyway, the guy hasn't crossed my mind since last Thanksgiving, but he won't be crossing my mind this Thanksgiving. And Randall Cobb's one of those guys, I think, for us as sharper players, we're just going to keep fading him, and the Donks are just going to keep playing him and taking all of our money. I'm not getting him on this week in a situation where I don't think they're going to necessarily need to be passing a ton. And then Witten, man. Yeah, I mean, I think Well, let me say, I don't think Dawson Knox is a sleeper at all. I think he might be the number 1 or number 2 most owned tight end on both slates, especially on FanDuel. He's 4-5. Jared Cook's 6-7. It's hard to get up to him. And Dawson Knox, I think, is going to be the go-to punt play. I really do on FanDuel. So definitely not a sleeper, but I like him a lot. I like him a lot better than Witten or whatever the dude's name is, Jarwin. And then on DraftKings, it's a little bit easier to get up to Cook, but I still think Dawson Knox is going to be on there. And then just one thought on McKenzie is I think he's a pretty nice pivot off of Wims, assuming Wims ownership gets up in the like 10 to 20% range. They're the same price. And let's be real. I mean, McKenzie's going to be projected for, I don't know, like a point or two less at most, and he could break off a big play. So I do like him a lot for tournaments. But yeah, all those secondary Cowboys pieces, I mean, really, the most likely outcome is they're just going to run the ball all the time. And if I was going to play a secondary option there, maybe it's Tony Pollard. I think he's going to be ignored. He's a great leverage play off of Zeke, who's just going to be insanely high owned. I mean, he scored a touchdown 2 weeks ago. So, you never know. And that's probably the route I'd rather go in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, they've mostly only used Tony Pollard as like a breather back and then also in garbage time. So it's tough for me to get excited about Tony Pollard. And I'm not sure it's leverage against Zeke because I think in the event like Zeke scores 2 touchdowns, that's when, or Zeke scores 3 touchdowns, then Pollard comes in.
Yeah, I mean, he's been running some routes the last couple of weeks. He had, pulling up right here, he had 4 targets each of the last 2 weeks. And the one touchdown he scored against Detroit was on a pass. And I think part of it was that Zeke had fumbled and they were punishing him a little bit. I think he played an entire series over Zeke, actually. That's probably not going to happen again. But, I mean, you never know. Maybe he's out there on a 3rd down, catches a touchdown. Like, look, it's a thin play. There's no question about it. But if he scores, that means Zeke isn't scoring. And I don't think it necessarily has to be a blowout, especially the way things are trending there.
Hey, we need to try to, identify the thin plays that are going to hit, right? I mean, who were the thin plays last year on Thanksgiving? Killer Keith Kirkwood.
Yeah.
And Trey Quinn.
Traquan. Or Trey Quinn or Traquan?
Trey Quinn. Well, we'll talk about Traquan in a minute.
Yeah.
But Trey Quinn. You remember he scored a touchdown and then did the Office Space dance?
Right? Oh, I do remember that now. Yeah,
but these short slates too, just keep in mind the leverage plays are worth a lot. So if you're getting a touchdown of that guy and you know that a guy that's going to be 75% owned is not getting a touchdown, or, look, I'm never playing for injuries, but it's a little bit more in play on these short slates where you just kind of need crazy things to happen to separate yourself. Like, maybe Zeke gets hurt. Pollard's an absolute smash play there. So I'm not playing for that reason, but if you're 150 and trying to win the millie or something, I would probably sprinkle him in at least.
And Tony Pollard has more targets than Ezekiel Elliott over the last 3 weeks, and he also returns kickoffs. So if you play him with the Dallas defense, you get double points, right?
Double dip, yes.
Has that ever actually worked?
Nobody talks about the double dip anymore. That used to be CSU used to mention that in every freaking podcast.
Because I think it worked one time with Tavon Austin, and it has never worked since.
Yeah. It's a hard one to make work. All right. I think we covered everybody in this game. Let's go ahead and move to what should be, what might be. I don't want to say what's definitely.
We didn't talk about Jason Witten.
Oh, we did mention him while you were off going to the bathroom. But yeah, what do you think? Give us your Jason Witten take.
No, I don't have anything. I'm glad that you guys talked about it while I was going.
Yeah, I mean, God, dude can barely walk out there. All right, what I think should be the highest scoring game. And not just because of the totals or whatever. I actually think that this does have direct paths to being the highest scoring game and should be the highest scoring game is Saints-Falcons. What's interesting is when these two teams met 2 weeks ago, the Saints did not score an offensive touchdown in the Superdome, which was like, to me, one of the biggest upsets of the entire year. I think Brandon made some good points about why the Saints offensive line struggled so badly in that game, but they picked up some more injuries on the offensive line since then. What do you think, Evan, about how Atlanta's defense matches up with New Orleans now? And also, I should mention, I said I was going to say the big story from each game. The big story from this game is obviously the Julio Jones injury, how you handle it, and the fallout from that. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But generally speaking, what do you think about Saints offense versus Falcons defense?
I mean, I was kind of on the Falcons defense, 2-game blip was, just kind of a farce. And I think that the Bucs kind of showed us that. I would say that it's a concern that, the Saints lost Teron Armstead last week, 10 snaps into the game. He's not going to play this week. He has a high ankle sprain. They already were missing Andrews Pete, who has a broken arm and is not going to play. So they're missing the entire left side of their offensive line. Now they have a guy named Nick Easton that they signed to a 4-year, $24 million deal before the season, and he can fill in adequately for Andrews Pete. But at left tackle, they had to play Patrick Omame last week, and they were able to survive it. I mean, again, Armstead went out pretty early in the game. Drew Brees gets the ball out quickly. He completed 30 of 39 passes last week. And that's against a much better pass rush in Carolina, which is like top 5 in sacks and number 6 in quarterback hits on the season. Now they're facing Atlanta, which just much, much less of a pass rush. So I think that, look, Sean Payton is one of the best offensive minds in the game. Drew Brees gets the ball out quickly. They can focus on quick passes to Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, and they can kind of circumvent that loss of Teron Armstead, who, I mean, he's a stud. He's one of the best left tackles in the league. He's also a really good run blocker. But I think that they can survive it.
Speaking of like surprising performances, I mean, God, the New Orleans home game against Atlanta, and then Atlanta's home game against the Bucks. I mean, they were just inept, and they kicked 2 short field goals early, and it was just really ugly from there. Matt Ryan absolutely fell apart. If Julio Jones can't go or is limited, I think it's going to be Calvin Ridley and Christian Blake on the outside with Russell Gage in the slot. Christian Blake was a guy who I played in the preseason a couple of times. I thought he was fine. Obviously, I think you have to lower the ceiling on Matt Ryan if he does not have Julio. Obviously, I think if Julio is out, Wiggins, Calvin Ridley is going to start popping in a big way. And we also have a situation where Marshawn Lattimore is questionable. And so there's a lot of moving parts here in this late game. I would want to have some flexibility, ideally, to move around if Julio ends up a game time decision. But yeah, what do you think? Let's do some if-thens. If Julio is out, do you consider Calvin Ridley a must? And would you bring Russell Gage and Christian Blake into play?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ridley would be pretty close to a must if Julio is out. And you know what? I'm not going to worry about Lattimore here. He's banged up. We don't even know if he's going to play. He could re-aggravate it. Generally, I lean towards not worrying about matchups unless it's a really imposing matchup. Like Stephon Gilmore, like we're worried about him, of course. Tre'Davion White, I'm a little bit worried about him already for sure. Lattimore, he's done a great job this year, but when he's banged up, I'm just – it's too short of a slate, I think, to give it too much thought. So if Julio's out, if Julio plays, not so worried about the matchup. I like Julio here. By the way, I do think Julio is going to play. I mean, he finished last game. It's Thanksgiving. This is a guy who has played through various ailments over the years. I think we'll have a better idea tomorrow. But, yeah, I mean, Ridley's been balling the last few games. He's really coming on. This is a talented guy who's capable of scoring touchdowns. So, you start looking at him like, if Julio's out, I'd prefer him over Amari for 600 more on DraftKings for sure. I think that'd be an easy decision. And then Gage, Gage basically becomes like almost he's 4 or 5. That's a little bit higher than I thought, but still a very strong play on FanDuel 5-4. Again, kind of the same thing, like not a must play, but a very strong play. I mean, if Julio's out, I'd prefer him over Anthony Miller for sure, just because I think it's just a better game environment.
Yeah.
And then the other guy, honestly, I didn't even know who that guy is. I thought it'd probably be Justin Hardy, but I haven't been paying attention to the depth chart behind those two guys. So, I mean, he's probably. I assume he's minimum, so like you could plug him in, but I probably wouldn't play him in cash.
It could be Justin Hardy. What do you think, Evan? If Julio sits, you think it'll be Hardy or Christian Blake?
Christian Blake. This guy had 9 targets last week. So if you look at the box score, you're like, ooh, what's up? And then he had 16 yards, and 6 of his targets were from Matt Schaub on the final drive.
Team preseason, yep.
Yeah. Now I watch Christian Blake be the guy that we all need. How bad would that suck?
I'm not ruling it out. I'm also not sure we'll see a role change for Russell Gage. Like, I'm not sure Russell Gage can play anywhere except for the slot. So even if Julio's out, I'm not sure Russell Gage necessarily sees a role change. You know what I mean?
Gage was big last week, though, man. 73% of the snaps, 56 routes run, which is just insane. 10 targets. All of his targets were, one of my initial concerns with Russell Gage was that he only had his big game with Matt Schaub in that game against Seattle, and they didn't do anything for 2 weeks with Matt Ryan. Well, last week he got all of his targets from Matt Ryan. So I think that that's a positive sign. I agree. I expected him to be cheaper, but I mean, the situation sets up pretty darn well for Russell Gage on paper. The Saints, they're a defense that you attack in the slot.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay. I want to mention the tight end injuries for the Falcons. Not expecting Austin Hooper to play. And I kind of think that Luke Stalker is going to sit too. Now, Jaden Graham is a dude that I was somewhat excited about when Austin Hooper first went down and they started giving Luke Stalker a bunch of snaps. Luke Stalker is a blocker. I don't know if they have someone else that they can plug in as a blocker, or if we just think that Jaden Graham's going to be out there running a route on every single Matt Ryan dropback. Because if Jaden Graham is, that would be intriguing. Jaden Graham is a strict pass catcher. And honestly, like, I don't think that I would rather play Jaden Graham, I think, than Dawson Knox. And I think it's not that far off from TJ Hawkinson if we know Stocker's out and he has a bump and roll. What do you think if Stocker's out, Jaden Graham's role will be, Evan?
He might play every snap. I mean, this another Ivy League tight end. I think he went to Yale.
He did. Yeah, this is a crazy week for Ivy Leaguers.
Yeah, seriously. He's got those beautiful blonde flowing locks that Wiggins used to have. He cut his hair, but he's a beautiful man out there. He had a huge gain just up the seam. It was an awesome play call. Got Jaden Graham like wide open against Tampa Bay last week. I think it was like he went for like 53 yards or something. He got up all fired up. Was targeted once the rest of the game. But I mean, guys keep like dropping. Like we got Julio banged up. Hooper is out, and Sanu is got traded, and I don't know. I think that Jaden Graham is he's pretty interesting. I mean, and I think that his stock continues to go up as we see a guy like Luke Stocker potentially not playing in this game. It just means more snaps. Like, I think that, these really thin guys on the fringes, just being out there, like one of these guys is going to have a good game. And, we got to try to identify that guy.
I wanted to mention Devontae Freeman practiced in full today. And it seems like Devontae Freeman will be back. And God, Brian Hill has been so bad. Like, he went on Davis Maddox podcast, and since then he's just been total dust. Like, holy cow, Brian Hill has been absolutely atrocious. I think Devontae Freeman comes back and takes most of the role. Devontae Freeman has not been productive pretty much at all. It's an extremely difficult matchup for Atlanta's offensive line against the Saints' defensive line. Devontae coming back, though, Wiggins, I mean, God, it would be the problem is, like, yeah, Devontae sounds horrible, and on a full slate, I would never do it, but we're comparing him to guys like David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the problem is the law of the Atlanta running backs is if he comes back, that means that Brian Hill will now be getting the red zone touches, and he will score all the touchdowns. So, no, I mean, but seriously, they just refuse to give these guys all the touches. And Freeman, I'm joking, of course. He actually has gotten most of the red zone touches. Man, yeah, it's not a play you're going to feel good about. And I think the fact that he's been injured for a few weeks, he's kind of off people's radar. He's been on the injury report this week. Will probably push his ownership down. And look, there's no way that he's much worse of a play than Montgomery. And he might have a third of the ownership. I don't know. Maybe it'll come up as people realize he's playing. It's a better game environment. But across, we're talking about these dusty tight ends. We're talking about dusty running backs. I would give, take the guy in the better game environment. This is a game that could legitimately go berserk. And you're not – I just don't think there's any outcome where you have like 35-40 in the Bears-Lions game. It's just never happening. And this game actually could potentially shoot out. There's a path for it to occur. So if you can get a guy for low ownership in the same price range in a game that might be a much better environment, yeah, I like it.
If Freeman plays, I feel like he would make sense as a guy that you could pivot to, as a late game swap, because he's probably going to have really low ownership. He does have some theoretical upside, and in your lineups that just look gross, I mean, he would make sense as a late swap.
For sure. Okay, I think one of the biggest questions on the slate is Jared Cook, because either you play Jared Cook, and we all know about Jared Cook's 4 ceiling combo. It's wide, okay? Or you punt it off with a lot of these guys that we've talked about who, God, I mean, we don't know if they're even going to be targeted, some of these guys. So I think a big question is, how much of a priority is Jared Cook? I'll start with Wiggins here before we get to Jared Cook's actual matchup. Just from a pricing perspective, how much of a priority do you think Jared Cook is? And, what the gap between Jared Cook and the next best tight end, depending on what you think about Jason Witten or Dawson Knox or some of these guys, it can be pretty wide. I think that's a question people need to ask themselves is, how wide do I think the gap is between Jared Cook and my second best tight end on this slate?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that could definitely break the slate. If he goes for like 700 and a touchdown, and all these other dust balls score like 5 or 6 points, which is, I mean, it could easily happen, then you're going to need to have him. So, look, on DraftKings, he's 4.8K. He's a lot easier to get into your lineup, I think, especially with some of these mid-price guys. I don't know. I haven't decided how much of a priority he is. And now you guys are selling me on this JD and Graham guy with the foreign locks and everything. That sounds pretty good. FanDuel is a totally different story, though. I mean, I just don't see how you can get him in your cash game lineups at 6.7K. It's just too expensive. So I'll probably be looking more at Knox at 4.5 or Graham's 4.9 on there. There's just Hawkinson 4.7. There's a bunch of guys in there, and you're just praying for a touchdown, basically, and you're praying that Cook doesn't have some crazy game. Really, if Cook doesn't score a touchdown on FanDuel, then you're probably fine with any of the other guys. DraftKings, he could get a bunch of catches. He could get the bonus. I know he had like 6 for 99 last week, I think, in a touchdown. So he scored 20 points, and he just missed the bonus too. That is probably the biggest decision point of the slate is what you do at tight end and then how it plays out. So think wisely. But yeah, it's a tough decision. I don't have the answer for you.
All right, Evan, why don't you talk about the exact matchup for Jared Cook? Because, yeah, we know Jared Cook's the best tight end play on the slate on raw projection, but how good of a play is Jared Cook just in a vacuum?
I think it's an awesome play. I mean, I think that, if you were just stretching him out to like the entire slate, just every game going on, he'd be like a top 5 play. He has 70-plus yards and or a touchdown in 5 straight games. So he's showed consistency. He leads all NFL tight ends in air yards over the last 3 weeks. The Saints should be able to put up a big number here. The Falcons haven't been good covering tight ends since they lost Keanu Neal way back when, and Jared Cook has been balling, man. I think he's severely underpriced on DraftKings.
Mm-hmm. We're getting to a point where you can't play. I mean, so I think the thing about it is playing. You can certainly do it with Jared Cook and Jared Cook and Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara and Ezekiel Elliott and Jared Cook, but you're likely going to end up with a lot of Bears in your lineup because that's where a lot of the value is. So,
hey, the Bears are playing the Lions, bro.
And the Bears are playing the Lions. They're still quarterbacked by Mitch Trubisky. So there's going to be some pause there. But yeah, I think that's the way a lot of lineups are going to go, specifically on DraftKings. All right, we didn't mention Traquan Smith and Ted Ginn. It's so frustrating to me that Drew Brees only throws to 3 guys. And really, he was only throwing to 2 guys for a while. Jared Cook's entered the trust tree lately. But God, I mean, I wish I could play Traquan. I think Traquan's actually good. I can't project him for more than like 2 targets. Can I, Evan?
Maybe 3. I mean, yeah, I don't get it. Like the Saints really, for the last couple years, when Michael Thomas is not in the slot and they have another slot receiver in the game, like that dude never gets the ball. I mean, it's been, Killa Keith, it's been Cam Meredith, during his, 2 or 3 chances. It's been Austin Carr, and now it's Traquan Smith. Like Traquan Smith is the Saints slot receiver, but man, they never throw the ball to him. I mean, he ran 30 routes last week, 18 of them in the slot, and you could definitely get after the Falcons in the slot. Like, look what Chris Godwin did last week against them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Traquan Smith is one of these really thin plays that, if he has, 3 for 45 and a touchdown, he's a really big difference maker on this slate. His price is pretty good. I think he's 3,800, I want to say. And I think that Ginn is 3,900. Is that correct?
I think so, yep.
Yeah. Ginn did have a big play chance. It just went right off his fingertips. Executed another one last week. He ran 30, like they ran the exact same number of routes, Ginn and Traquan Smith last week. Ginn had 5 targets. Traquan Smith had 3. They're just almost like the same play. And at the end of the day, like they'll probably be separated by like 7 fantasy points, and getting them right, getting the guy right here, I think has a chance to be a tilter on this slate.
Yeah, sorry. Traquan Smith is 3,500 on DraftKings. Ted Ginn is 3,800, so they're even cheaper. And yeah, I mean, I think Traquan Smith is younger and better, but Ted Ginn certainly has a longer history with Drew Brees. Any interest in these guys, Wiggins? I mean, in the large field stuff, these guys have chances, I think, to break slates. I'm just not that optimistic they're going to see any volume whatsoever.
No, they're not going to receive much volume, but they could. You don't really need the volume. What you're looking for is 1, maybe 2 long touchdowns, and their leverage plays of a Michael Thomas, Kamara, and Jared Cook are going to be the highest owned guys on the slate. So yes, you have to look at them in tournaments, and I would look more at Ted Ginn because Traquan Smith is the sexy play. He's cheaper. He's going to garner more ownership, and I think his expectation is lower than Ted Ginn. So I don't know what Ted Ginn's going to be owned at. Probably like 5%, maybe. Traquan's like pushing 10 or something just because it's such a small slate. So I'd take the guy that I think is probably projected for a point or 2 more and is less owned. And, it's a dart throw, but you're just hoping he catches a long touchdown. And if he does, you very well may need him in your lineup to win a big tournament.
We haven't mentioned the Saints running back situation. Obviously, Alvin Kamara, I mean, God, even in games where Alvin Kamara could not get much going, he ends up catching 9 balls. The floor on Alvin Kamara and the way he's being used, specifically on full PPR DraftKings, is just outrageous. Latavius Murray is 5,600, which I think is going to price a lot of people out. Obviously, Alvin Kamara, I think, is going to be like 70% owned or something like that. You guys don't need us to tell you that he's a great play. Can we gain leverage by playing Latavius instead of Kamara, Evan? Or can we actually are the paths to Kamara and Latavius both having good games?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, this is just not a spot where I want to play Latavius Murray. He's been under 40% of the snaps in each of the last 3 games in which since Alvin Kamara came back from his injury. Latavius Murray 7, 12, and 7 touches in those games. I think the Falcons defense ultimately isn't very good. And I think that, there is a chance the Saints could build a big lead, and Latavius Murray is just, churning clock and churning yards and, even potentially churning touchdowns. And that would, be very, very tilting, as someone that's probably not going to play very much Latavius Murray. But I mean, he's not, he's not a fun play right now. I mean, he's priced above David Montgomery, who certainly projects for more touches than him. He's well priced ahead of Tariq Cohen. Alvin Kamara is just what a monster. I mean, 7, 8, 10, 9 catches in his last 4 games. I don't know. I mean, he's one of those, like Latavius Murray is one of those like game theory plays that I can never latch on to.
Yeah.
I don't think you can touch Latavius. He's guaranteed to catch more ownership than he should here just because of what he's done. And people just, people can talk themselves into him, and he scored a 26-yard touchdown or something around there last week. But Kamara is the one that's getting the high value touches. He's got serious touchdown regression coming. He has only 2 touchdowns this entire season, and it was just in 1 game, which I was just looking at today, and it blew my mind. He had I think 18 touchdowns last year, 13 the year prior, when he didn't even play for much for the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. So Kamara is going to have a huge game sooner rather than later. Yeah, and like Evan said, you have all these other running backs that are going to get a bunch of touches that are in the same price range. So you know what? If the game gets away from us and he ends up salting it and has a big game, so be it. But he's guaranteed to be on more than he should for the output that we should expect here.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's going to be as high owned as you guys think. I think his price is going to be a little bit prohibitive to people, but we'll see. And I'll keep working on the ownership projections. I'll probably do my last run on early Thursday morning. Last thing I want to talk about before we get out of here is the quarterbacks in this game. I want to ignore price for a second, Evan. I don't think that Dak is definitely a better raw projection than Drew Brees in this game. And I understand Drew Brees is way more expensive, but ignore price for a second. Who would you rather have, Brees or Dak?
Oh, I think it's an easy decision. I think it's Brees, right?
Right.
But Brees is what, 1,100 more on DraftKings than Dak Prescott? Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we can fit him. I mean, I think there's enough
Yeah.
value, and I think that the studs are priced reasonably enough, especially Michael Thomas, who I don't know, his price went down this week, and Ezekiel Elliott, I think, is not priced where appropriately that or at least. I mean, I think that DraftKings wanted to make it fun, for everyone, and to play some studs, and um, that allows us to get to Drew Brees. And I think that, yeah, Drew Brees is the best raw projection quarterback on the slate. I don't know. I think that Dak is going to have less ownership than you, but you're the ownership wizard, and I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to these things.
Well, specifically on DraftKings, Dak is going to be owned because of the price. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But yeah, I agree with you that I think Brees is significantly a better play than Dak here. And on Matt Ryan, I mean, he burned a lot of people last week, including myself. Matt Ryan was the highest owned quarterback by a wide margin. I think Matt Ryan has bounce back games in him. For sure. Was there anything you saw last week from Matt Ryan that makes you think that he can't bounce back here? Or was it just a blip one-off?
No, the biggest problem is that he's been under constant pressure. Well, first of all, he has been dealing with a high ankle sprain, and he's been under constant pressure. And he lost his, under pressure dude in Austin Hooper. They traded away Mohamed Sanu, who could also serve in a similar role. Since their bye week, he's been the fourth most pressured quarterback in the NFL. And their offense is it's non-functional, man. We see it in the running game. We see it in the ups and downs from their passing game. They have scored so many points, they've really leaned on garbage time to score so many of their points this year. And it's, they had the 2-game blip, where they're being carried by the defense, and now the defense is bad again, and so is the offense. So it's been kind of a sad year for the Falcons.
The quarterback position, Wiggins, final word here. I do agree with me that Dak is going to be significantly more owned than Brees, or at least even with Brees, given the pricing on DraftKings. And do you think that we should be prioritizing getting up to the quarterbacks in this game?
Yeah, I mean, definitely on DraftKings, he's going to be more owned. On FanDuel, I think it's pretty safe to say that Brees will be the most owned. He's only 300 more than Dak. I would add also to what Evan was just saying, there's serious reason for concern with Matt Ryan. And then just one other footnote with the tight end situation is that the Stocker can't go. Maybe they can't afford to not have a tight end out there that isn't blocking. So I wouldn't just assume that they're going to have Graham out there running a bunch of routes, because they're going to need all the protection they can get. So, and the Saints defense is good. So there's a lot of ways that this should be a dumpster fire for the Falcons. So, and that's why I like Matt Ryan a lot in tournaments on DraftKings. He's 6.4K. You just kind of no man's land there. People are they're gonna want to play Josh Allen for 200 less. He's a sexier play. Dak for 700 less, and then Brees, is only 400 more. So I don't think he'll catch any ownership on DraftKings, even in tournaments. And then FanDuel, he's 7.7. So he's really the cheapest in-play quarterback. So I think he'll catch a lot more ownership there. And you could even consider him maybe in cash there. But I don't know. It makes me a little bit worried. I think I'm going to try and get up to Brees there, just because, Brees is one of these guys who just doesn't project as well as I think he should. I don't know. I get how it works out, but he's a lot more likely to go off than any other quarterback on the slate, in my opinion. So, and he just has such a high floor that, and it's not that hard to get to him. It's only $800 off of Matt Ryan. So it's if you save that $800 and Matt Ryan goes for 8 points again, like he did last week, and Brees goes for 25, you're going to be regretting not finding that money, because it's not that hard on FanDuel this week.
We didn't mention Michael Thomas. I think it goes without saying that Michael Thomas is the level Michael Thomas is playing at right now. I would compare the way he's being used to almost like a running back, given his catch rate, given his route tree, and given how much they rely on him. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And Michael Thomas, I think, will be probably the most owned, higher owned than Kamara and higher owned than Ezekiel Elliott, and I think with good reason. So I assume you don't see any merit for Michael Thomas fades, Evan, outside of ownership / galaxy brain, game theory bro stuff.
Given the fact that Michael Thomas' salary went down because DraftKings, wanted to just make it fun for the people. I mean, should we play Thursday through, Monday so that we can get Michael Thomas at 9,100, whereas he should be priced at like 10K, and Ezekiel Elliott at 7,400 seems like an awfully good price as well. We're getting these dudes at like super low. Like, should we play Thursday through Monday?
Yeah, I mean, Wiggins plays every slate. We on Thursday to Monday slate, Wiggins?
I don't play that anymore. I'm an old man. I would say Michael Thomas, though. I think he's a much better fade on FanDuel because you don't have the bonus, you don't have the PPR. So you're basically just hoping he doesn't score a touchdown. And there's a lot of other guys who can score touchdowns there. So much prefer fading him on FanDuel. And DraftKings, I think his worst game of the year is like 16 or 17 points. So, I mean, he's just, like you said, he's like a running back. He's almost better than all the running backs. His floor is just so absurdly high. It's like he's way more likely to go for 30, I feel like, than like 10. So he's a tough fade on DraftKings at that price.
Yeah, the way he's being used is like so perfect for a DraftKings format. It's like, it's crazy what's going on. And same with McCaffrey too, who DraftKings, I think, underpriced to get on the main slate. But anyways, we'll be talking about that on Friday. I think we've covered this Thanksgiving slate. I can't believe we just spent over an hour on 3 games. There's something truly sick and wrong with us. We will spend roughly 90 minutes on Friday night going position by position, talking through our favorite plays and plays maybe we don't like on Friday night. And that will be not on YouTube. That will be on Establish the Run. If you are not a member yet, we do have a bunch of promo codes going. As I said at the top, you can go ahead and scroll back on your trusty YouTube scroller there, go back to the beginning, find the promo codes, find what you need, get in the ETR member league. If you already are a member, we hope to see you in there. All right. Hope you all sincerely have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy your bird carcass, your anal stuffing, get it down to the bone, do all that good stuff. And really, more importantly, enjoy the slate, man, because this is a, short slate. For those of you guys that don't normally play short slates, they're so fun. I think Wiggins said it before, like every play means so much. It's not like, well, that guy just went off for 50-yard touchdown, I can get it back later. There's like, no, there's no getting it back later. If you don't have them, it's curtains. So every play means a ton on the 3-game slates, which, is the most fun. So for Evan, for Wiggins, for everybody at ETR, we wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. We will see you on Friday night.